After 7 years of marriage, she's pregnant with triplets. CEO husband hires 50 nurses to pamper her. Hello, my beautiful viewers. A very warm welcome to each and every one of you. I'm so grateful that you're here today. I'm James, your storyteller, and I can't tell you how happy I am to share this moment with you. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to send you my deepest and most heartfelt prayers. I pray that your heart is always filled with peace, that your days are touched with joy, and that whatever you're going through right now, you find strength and comfort, knowing that you are never alone. May you be surrounded by love, may your dreams come true, and may you always know how precious you are. Today's story is very special, and I mean very special. It's the story of Alcott and Marie, a breathtaking journey of love, devotion, and the kind of connection that leaves a mark on your soul. But what makes this story even more meaningful to me is that Alcott is not just any character. He's actually inspired by my own brother. That's right. My brother, Alcott, is also a storyteller, and he's incredibly talented at weaving powerful and emotional stories that touch the heart. I've added a link to his channel in the description below, so please make sure to check him out and show him some love and support. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. Also, if you're new here or you've been watching my stories for a while, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another story. Your support means everything to me. It helps this channel grow and allows me to keep bringing you beautiful stories like this one. So, hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, and let me know how this story touches your heart. So, get comfortable, settle in, and let's dive into this very special story of Alcott and Marie. This is a story about love, about finding strength in each other, and about the kind of bond that stands the test of time. Are you ready? Let's begin. Marie and Alcott had been married for nearly a decade, their love story woven together with threads of passion, devotion, and a longing so profound that it sometimes became difficult to breathe under the weight of it. Alcott, a self-made millionaire with a heart hardened by the brutal lessons of business and life, had always found solace in Marie's gentle touch and unwavering love. Marie, with her soft hazel eyes and golden waves of hair that cascaded down her back, was the light of his life, the very reason he built his empire. He had everything a man could desire: mansions sprawling across exotic locations, a fleet of the most expensive cars, private jets, and an endless stream of wealth that made the world bow at his feet. But none of it could fill the aching void that sat heavily in the center of their otherwise perfect life. From the outside, they were the picture of perfection. Marie with her radiant smile and graceful elegance, Alcott with his dominating presence and powerful aura. But behind closed doors, they were prisoners of an unspoken emptiness. They had tried for years to have a baby, each month filled with hope, only to be crushed by disappointment when the pregnancy tests came back negative. The weight of their infertility was like an invisible chain, tightening around their hearts, suffocating them with the fear that they would never experience the joy of parenthood. Marie would often sit alone in the vast nursery Alcott had prepared for their future child. Walls painted in soft shades of cream and gold, shelves lined with plush toys and storybooks. Running her fingers over the tiny clothes she had bought in anticipation, she would press her face into the soft cotton fabric, tears slipping down her cheeks as she imagined holding a baby in her arms, feeling its heartbeat against her chest. Alcott would find her there sometimes, his heart twisting painfully at the sight of her curled up on the rocking chair, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He would kneel beside her, brushing her hair back tenderly and kissing her tears away, even though his own heart was silently bleeding. "It will happen, Marie," he would whisper, his voice rough with emotion. "God will bless us. I know it." But Marie could see the fear behind his eyes, the same fear that haunted her every night when she lay in bed, her hand resting protectively over her empty womb. They had visited the finest doctors in the world, spent thousands on fertility treatments, endured invasive procedures, and followed every piece of medical advice given to them. But still, nothing worked. Marie had even tried ancient remedies and alternative therapies in a desperate bid to make her body cooperate, but the outcome remained painfully unchanged. Their love, however, never wavered under the weight of this unfulfilled dream. If anything, it grew stronger, more desperate, more intense. Alcott would hold Marie tightly at night, whispering sweet promises into her ear as his lips traced the sensitive curve of her neck. He would make love to her with the fierce tenderness of a man trying to will life into existence, holding her afterward as if he could protect her from the devastating emptiness that followed. "We have to believe," he would say, his hand resting over her flat stomach, his voice trembling with both hope and quiet desperation. Marie would nod and smile through her tears, but the ache in her chest never left. She felt like a failure sometimes, wondering why her body refused to give Alcott the child he so desperately wanted. He never blamed her, never once, but that made it even harder to bear. Alcott was the most loving and patient husband a woman could ask for. He pampered her relentlessly, showering her with gifts and attention, whisking her away on spontaneous trips to the French Riviera and the Amalfi Coast, trying to distract her from the emptiness that followed them everywhere. He would wake her with breakfast in bed, flowers scattered over their silk sheets, his eyes dark with love as he kissed her good morning. He would run her baths at night, the warm water infused with rose petals and essential oils, massaging her shoulders and holding her close, as if he could somehow transfer his strength to her through sheer contact. They would sit on the balcony of their mansion overlooking the ocean, Alcott's arm wrapped protectively around Marie as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Do you think it will ever happen for us?" Marie would ask quietly, her head resting against Alcott's shoulder. Alcott would tighten his hold on her, his jaw clenching. "Yes," he would say with absolute certainty. "It will happen. God wouldn't have given me you if he didn't intend to give us a family." Marie would nod, but deep down the doubt gnawed at her. Still, she held on to Alcott's faith because if she lost that, she would crumble entirely. Despite the ache in their hearts, Alcott and Marie never allowed their struggle to diminish their love for each other. Alcott was obsessively attentive, constantly seeking new treatments, hiring specialists, and doing everything in his power to make Marie happy. He would cancel high-stakes business meetings to stay home with her when he sensed she was feeling low. He would climb into bed beside her when sleepless nights tormented her, pulling her against his chest and murmuring soothing words until her breathing evened out and her body relaxed. They shielded each other from the pitying glances of friends and family who, despite their best intentions, couldn't understand the depth of their pain. They kept their struggle private, not wanting the world to know how fragile their hearts had become. But even in the darkest moments, Alcott never lost sight of the light he saw in Marie. "You're enough for me," he would tell her often, his fingers brushing through her hair. "Even if we never have children, you're everything I need." But Marie knew better. She knew Alcott longed to be a father, to have a child who shared his sharp blue eyes and his strong features. He would be the most loving father in the world. She had no doubt about that. He was already the most devoted husband. And so they held on to hope, praying silently at night with their hands entwined, tears slipping down their cheeks as they whispered their wishes to the universe. Marie would fall asleep with Alcott's arms wrapped tightly around her, feeling the rise and fall of his chest beneath her cheek. Even though the emptiness remained, their love was a powerful force that kept them afloat. And deep down, beneath the ache and the longing, Marie and Alcott both believed that one day God would hear their prayers and bless them with the miracle they had waited so long for. Their love was built on hope and longing, And even though their hearts were bruised, their faith in each other and the life they had built together remained unbreakable. There were nights when Marie lay awake in the vast expanse of their king-sized bed, her slender frame curled beneath the heavy silk sheets, her chest rising and falling with the uneven cadence of suppressed sobs. The darkness of the room mirrored the emptiness she felt inside, a hollow ache that no amount of luxury or love could fill. The room was silent except for the soft rustling of the ocean breeze against the sheer curtains, but the silence only amplified the storm of sadness swirling in her chest. Marie would stare at the ceiling, her eyes glassy with tears that refused to fall until the weight of her grief became unbearable. And then, without warning, the dam would break, and the tears would slip down her cheeks, hot and relentless, soaking into the pillow beneath her head. Her delicate hands would tremble as they pressed against her flat stomach, her mind torturing her with the cruel thought that perhaps her body was defective, that perhaps she was never meant to be a mother. The longing for a child was not just a desire, it was an ache so visceral that it sometimes left her breathless. She had tried to stay strong for Alcott, to smile through the pain and carry herself with the poise expected of the wife of a billionaire. But on nights like this, when the walls of her heart seemed to close in on her, the pretense shattered. She would bite down on her lip to keep from sobbing too loudly, but Alcott was always attuned to her, even in the deepest sleep. He would stir at the sound of her quiet pain, his instincts sharpening instantly as his eyes blinked open, the moonlight reflecting in the deep blue of his irises. Without hesitation, he would reach for her, his strong arms slipping around her waist as he pulled her close against his chest. "Marie," he would murmur, his voice thick with sleep and worry as he pressed his lips to her temple. "Why didn't you wake me?" His question was soft, but beneath it lay a quiet desperation, a need to protect her from the torment she tried so hard to hide. Marie would shake her head, burying her face against his bare chest, her tears soaking into his warm skin. "I didn't want to wake you," she would whisper brokenly, her voice cracking under the weight of her sorrow. Alcott's jaw would tighten as he held her closer, his heart twisting painfully in his chest. "You don't have to carry this alone," he would say, his hand sliding through her soft hair, cradling her head with the tenderness of a man who loved her more than life itself. "Let me share the pain with you, Marie." Please. But how could she explain that the pain was not something he could carry for her? It was lodged deep within her soul, a gaping wound that reopened every time another month passed without the two pink lines they longed to see. Still, Marie would clutch him tightly, her tears falling harder as Alcott's lips traced soothing patterns along her forehead, her cheeks, her trembling mouth. His arms were a fortress around her, his steady heartbeat beneath her ear the only thing grounding her when the sadness threatened to swallow her whole. "I feel like my body is betraying me," she would confess in the dark, her voice raw and heavy with self-blame. "Like I'm not enough for you." At those words, Alcott would stiffen, his hand tilting her chin up until her tear-streaked eyes met his fierce gaze. "Don't you ever say that again," he would whisper, his tone sharp but his touch infinitely gentle. "You are everything to me, Marie. Everything." His lips would press against her forehead, lingering there as his breath fanned across her skin. "Whether we have a child or not, you are my life. Do you understand?" Marie would nod, but the doubt lingered in her heart, gnawing at the fragile edges of her hope. Alcott could see it, he could feel it, and it made his chest ache with helplessness. He was a man who controlled empires, who built wealth and power with the sharpness of his mind and the strength of his will. But in the face of Marie's pain, he was powerless, and that terrified him more than any business deal or financial loss ever could. He longed to give her the family they both dreamed of, to see the joy of motherhood reflected in her eyes, to hear the soft sound of a baby's laughter filling the cold, empty corners of their grand villa. But no amount of money or influence could force the universe to grant them this miracle. All Alcott could do was love her harder, deeper, with a devotion so fierce that it sometimes scared him. He would wake early and watch her sleep, his hand brushing through her golden hair as he memorized every delicate line of her face. He would hold her hand through every doctor's appointment, his eyes dark with protective intensity as he listened to the specialists offer their clinical advice. He would book spontaneous trips to remote islands, hoping the change of scenery would lift her spirits, hoping that maybe, just maybe, relaxation would coax her body into accepting the life they so desperately wanted to create together. But even in the most beautiful destinations, Marie's sadness lingered beneath the surface, a shadow in her otherwise luminous gaze. Alcott would notice the way her smile would fade when she saw mothers cradling their babies in the park, the way her eyes would darken when a child's laughter echoed through a crowded restaurant. He would tighten his hold on her hand during those moments, his thumb brushing reassuring circles over her skin, silently promising her that one day they would have that too. And when they returned home to the quiet emptiness of their villa, Alcott would make love to her with a desperation that bordered on obsession. He would worship her body, kissing every inch of her skin as if he could imprint his love deep into her bones. He would whisper promises into her ear as their bodies entwined, vowing that they would never stop trying, never stop hoping. Afterward, when Marie lay curled against his chest, Alcott would stroke her back, his lips pressed to her hair. "One day, Marie," he would whisper, "one day we'll hold our baby in our arms, and this pain will be a distant memory." Marie would close her eyes, holding on to the sound of his voice, letting his hope become her lifeline when her own faith wavered. But in the stillness of the night, when Alcott's breathing evened out and he drifted into sleep, Marie's tears would return. She would slip out of bed, walking barefoot through the darkened halls of their mansion until she reached the nursery, the untouched room that Alcott had designed with such care. She would sit in the rocking chair, her hand resting over her empty womb, and cry silently into the darkness, praying with every breath that God would hear them. And on those nights, Alcott would wake to find her missing, his heart racing with fear as he searched the house until he found her in the nursery. He would kneel beside her, gathering her trembling body into his arms, his lips pressing desperately against her temple. "Come back to bed," he would plead softly. "Don't torture yourself like this." And Marie would follow him, letting him carry her back to the warmth of their bed, where he would hold her until sleep claimed them both. In the morning, they would rise hand in hand and face another day with quiet strength. And even though the pain remained, they never stopped believing that one day the miracle they longed for would find them. Their love, though strained by sadness, remained unbreakable, a beacon of hope in the midst of darkness. Alcott and Marie's love was a force so deep and consuming that even the darkest shadows of their unfulfilled longing could not diminish it. Despite the ache in their hearts and the quiet emptiness that lingered in the air of their grand villa, their bond remained unbreakable, a sacred connection that grew stronger with every shared glance, every whispered promise, and every touch that burned with unspoken devotion. Alcott worshipped Marie with the kind of intensity that made the world around them disappear whenever he held her in his arms. He treated her not just as his wife, but as the queen of his heart, the axis upon which his entire existence revolved. He knew her pain as intimately as his own heartbeat, and though it killed him to see the quiet sadness in her eyes, he made it his mission to replace her tears with smiles, her sorrow with joy. He would plan spontaneous romantic getaways, whisking her away to secluded beaches with pristine white sands and crystal clear waters, where the world felt blissfully still, and the only sound was the rhythmic crash of the waves. Marie would sit beneath the sun, her long golden hair cascading over her shoulders, her skin glowing beneath the soft caress of the ocean breeze. Alcott would watch her from a distance, his heart tightening at the sight of her ethereal beauty. He would approach her with quiet reverence, kneeling beside her as his hand traced the delicate curve of her jaw. "You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he would whisper, his lips brushing against the corner of her mouth. Marie would smile, her cheeks flushing as he pulled her into his arms and carried her toward the water. They would swim together beneath the golden light of the setting sun, their laughter echoing across the empty beach as Alcott wrapped his arms around her waist and pressed his mouth to her wet skin. Later, as the night fell and the stars bloomed in the velvet sky, Alcott would carry her back to their private villa, where he had prepared a candlelit dinner overlooking the ocean. The table was adorned with white roses, Marie's favorite, and the flickering glow of the candles cast golden light over their entwined hands. Alcott would feed her from his own fork, his eyes never leaving hers as he stroked his thumb over the back of her hand. "I love you," he would say, his voice low and rough with emotion. Marie's eyes would soften as she reached for his face, her fingers brushing through his dark hair. "I love you too." After dinner, Alcott would draw her a bath, filling the deep marble tub with warm water and scattering fresh rose petals over the surface. He would kneel beside the tub as Marie sank into the fragrant water, his hand brushing through the wet tendrils of her hair. "Relax, sweetheart," he would murmur, his lips trailing along her damp shoulder. "Let me take care of you." And he would. He would wash her body with infinite tenderness, his hands gliding over her soft skin with a worshipful touch. His fingers would linger over the gentle swell of her stomach, his eyes dark with longing as he imagined the day when her body would carry their child, their miracle. "We will have a baby," Alcott would whisper, his hands splaying possessively over her abdomen. "I know it." Marie's eyes would shimmer with tears as she covered his hand with hers, her heart swelling with fragile hope. Later, Alcott would carry her to bed, his mouth claiming hers in a kiss that left her breathless. Their nights were a tapestry of passion and tenderness, fueled by a love so deep it bordered on obsession. Alcott would undress her slowly, savoring every inch of her delicate skin as if he were discovering her for the first time. His hands would trace the gentle curves of her body, his lips following the path of his fingers as he worshipped her beneath the soft glow of the moonlight. "You are mine, Marie," he would breathe against her throat, his voice low and rough with desire. "Every part of you belongs to me." Marie would arch beneath him, her breath hitching as Alcott's hands slid down her body, his touch reverent yet possessive. He would make love to her with a desperation that bordered on reverence, as if through their union, they could create the life they so desperately longed for. His mouth would linger over the hollow of her throat, the curve of her shoulder, the delicate swell of her breast, leaving marks of his devotion etched into her skin. "I love you," he would murmur between kisses, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you so much." Marie's hands would clutch his back, her nails digging into his skin as waves of pleasure and love crashed over her. They would fall asleep wrapped in each other's arms, their limbs tangled beneath the silk sheets, their breaths mingling in the quiet dark. Alcott would wake before dawn, his hand drifting over Marie's stomach as he imagined the day when he would feel the flutter of life beneath his palm. He would press a soft kiss to her temple, his eyes dark with quiet determination. "It will happen," he would whisper into her hair. "I know it." And Marie would believe him because Alcott's love was a force of nature, unshakable, unstoppable. During the day, Alcott would continue to surround her with quiet acts of devotion. He would leave handwritten notes on her pillow, simple messages that said, "You are everything to me and I can't wait to meet our baby one day." He would send bouquets of white roses to her studio, knowing how much she loved their delicate scent. When Marie worked late into the evening, Alcott would appear at her side, carrying a glass of wine and insisting she take a break. He would sit beside her, his hand resting possessively on her thigh as he watched her with quiet intensity. "You work too hard," he would say, his voice laced with affection. Marie would smile, leaning into him as his arm wrapped around her shoulders. "I'm fine." "You're perfect," Alcott would counter, his gaze burning with love. And then there were the nights when Alcott's control would unravel completely. He would return home from work, his eyes dark with longing as he watched Marie prepare dinner. He would cross the room in a few strides, spinning her around and pressing her against the cool marble of the kitchen counter. "I need you," he would growl, his mouth crashing down on hers. Marie's gasp would melt into a soft moan as Alcott's hands gripped her hips, lifting her onto the counter. "Alcott," she would whisper, but he would silence her with another fierce kiss. "Shh," he would murmur against her lips. "Let me love you." And he would. He would carry her to bed, his hands stripping away her clothes with practiced ease, his mouth claiming every inch of her trembling body. "I love you," he would whisper, his voice thick with devotion. "We will have a baby. I know it." Marie's heart would swell as she clung to him, her eyes brimming with tears of love and hope. And in those moments, as their bodies joined and their souls entwined, Marie would believe it too. Their love was a sacred thing, a bond forged in the fires of longing and strengthened by unwavering faith. And though the path to their miracle remained uncertain, they faced it together, hand in hand, hearts aligned beneath the quiet hum of destiny. Marie woke up that morning feeling strange, a subtle shift in her body that she couldn't quite explain. Her head felt light, and her stomach rolled with an unfamiliar wave of nausea. At first, she brushed it off as exhaustion. Perhaps she had overworked herself the previous day, or maybe it was something she ate. But as she stood in front of the mirror in their grand villa's master bedroom, the luxurious white curtains fluttering in the morning breeze, the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Her reflection stared back at her, golden hair cascading over her delicate shoulders, her pale blue eyes slightly clouded with uncertainty. A sudden flutter in her stomach made her hand press instinctively over her abdomen. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be? No, it couldn't be. Marie bit her lip, stepping away from the mirror and trying to steady her breathing. She couldn't let herself hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope had left her in tears so many times before. She had taken countless pregnancy tests over the years, each one ending in crushing disappointment. Alcott would always hold her afterward, pressing her tear-streaked face to his chest and whispering promises that it would happen one day. But Marie had stopped believing long ago. Yet, this time felt different. Her body felt different. Her hand trembled as she opened the drawer in the bathroom vanity. There, beneath an assortment of cosmetics and skincare products, lay a small box. A pregnancy test she had bought months ago but had been too afraid to use. Her breath quickened as she retrieved it, her heart hammering against her ribcage. "Don't get your hopes up," she whispered to herself as she tore open the packaging with shaking hands. The bathroom felt unnervingly quiet as she followed the instructions and then sat on the edge of the marble tub, clutching the test in her trembling hands. The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might shatter her chest. Her gaze flicked down to the small plastic stick in her hand. The word "positive" appeared in crisp, dark letters. Marie's breath caught. Her vision blurred with tears as the reality of it hit her like a freight train. Positive. It was positive. Her hands flew to her mouth as a sob escaped her throat. "Oh my God," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. Her chest tightened with overwhelming emotion, a mix of disbelief, fear, and a tentative kind of joy that felt almost too dangerous to embrace. Trembling, she stumbled to her feet, her mind racing. No, this couldn't be real. There had to be a mistake. She needed confirmation. Her shaking fingers dialed her doctor's number, and she somehow managed to schedule an emergency appointment for that afternoon. Alcott was away on business, which gave her just enough time to gather herself. Her mind spun with frantic thoughts as the car sped toward the hospital, her hand resting protectively over her stomach, as if she were afraid the miracle might disappear if she didn't hold it tightly enough. The waiting room was a blur of pastel walls and hushed conversations. Marie sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart thundering in her ears as the nurse called her name. The doctor was kind, his smile gentle as he guided her into the examination room. "Let's take a look," he said softly, his voice calm and reassuring. Marie lay back on the examination table, her breath hitching as the cool gel spread across her abdomen. Her heart pounded uncontrollably as the ultrasound wand moved across her skin. And then, she heard it, the rapid fluttering sound of a heartbeat. Marie's breath caught, her chest tightening as tears welled in her eyes. "There's a heartbeat," she whispered. The doctor smiled. "Yes, and not just one." Marie's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" The doctor turned the screen toward her. "Congratulations, Mrs. Alcott," he said with quiet warmth. "You're pregnant with triplets." Marie's heart stopped. "Triplets," she choked out. "3 babies?" The doctor nodded, his smile widening. Marie's hands flew to her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks. Her whole body trembled as the reality of it sank in. Not just one miracle, 3. She was carrying 3 lives inside of her. Her chest heaved as sobs escaped her throat, and the doctor handed her a tissue, his smile soft with understanding. "It's rare, but sometimes after years of infertility, the body responds in miraculous ways." Marie pressed a hand over her trembling lips, her tears falling freely. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. 3 babies. Alcott's babies. Her hands hovered over her belly as if she could already feel their tiny heartbeats beneath her skin. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Thank you. Thank you." Her mind raced as the doctor explained the next steps, the vitamins, the appointments, the precautions they would need to take with a high-risk pregnancy. But Marie barely heard him. Her heart was too full, her mind spinning with the sheer magnitude of the miracle unfolding within her. When the appointment was over, Marie walked through the hospital halls in a daze, her hands instinctively resting over her abdomen. Her driver was waiting outside, and she slid into the back seat, clutching the ultrasound photos in her shaking hands. Her gaze blurred with tears as she traced the delicate shapes on the paper. 3 tiny figures, curled up together, already so precious and loved. When she arrived home, Alcott was already waiting. His tall figure stood at the top of the grand staircase, his dark eyes narrowing with concern as he saw the tear tracks on her cheeks. "Marie," he said, descending the stairs in swift, measured steps. "What happened?" Marie's chest heaved as she held out the ultrasound photos with trembling hands. Alcott's eyes darkened as he reached for them, his strong hands closing around the edges of the paper. He looked down, his gaze sharpening as he processed what he was seeing. His breath hitched. "Marie!" His voice broke. Marie pressed a hand over her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. "With triplets." Alcott's head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Triplets." His gaze flew to her face, searching her tear-streaked expression for confirmation. When she nodded, his breath left him in a sharp exhale. "Oh my God," he whispered. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his hands framing her face as his eyes burned with raw emotion. "Marie, you're pregnant." "Yes," she sobbed, "with 3 babies." Alcott's mouth crashed down on hers in a fierce, breathless kiss. His hands trembled as they slid down to her stomach, his palms splaying protectively over her abdomen. "Our babies," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. His forehead pressed against hers as his breath shook. "God, Marie, you've made me the happiest man alive." Marie's tears mingled with his as his arms tightened around her. "I love you," she choked out. "I love you so much." Alcott's chest heaved as he kissed her again, his lips tender against hers. "You've given me everything I've ever dreamed of," he whispered. "And I swear, Marie, I will protect you and our babies with my life." And in that moment, as they stood beneath the soft glow of the crystal chandelier, their hands intertwined over the new life growing between them, Marie knew that their love had truly created a miracle. Marie sat frozen in the soft white hospital chair, her trembling hands pressed protectively against her still flat abdomen as the doctor's words echoed in her ears like a surreal dream she couldn't quite grasp. Triplets. 3 babies. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for, more than her fragile heart had been able to imagine after years of disappointment and heartbreak. Her heart hammered violently against her ribcage as the weight of the news settled over her like a tidal wave. Tears blurred her vision, slipping silently down her cheeks as 1,000 emotions crashed through her at once. Shock, disbelief, overwhelming gratitude, and an aching, fragile joy that almost frightened her in its intensity. She had dreamed of having one child, a single heartbeat, a single soul to nurture and love. But God had blessed her with 3. Her trembling fingers brushed across the cool paper of the ultrasound photo resting in her lap, her gaze falling on the delicate shapes of her babies, curled together in the small black and white image. 3 tiny lives, 3 heartbeats. Her chest tightened, her breath hitching painfully as her tears fell faster. She had never imagined this moment would come, not after so many years of hoping and being crushed under the weight of endless negative tests and dashed dreams. And now, triplets. She leaned back in the chair, clutching the photo to her chest as her breath hitched, her lips parting in a silent prayer of gratitude. Just then, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor outside, quick and urgent. Marie's heart quickened when she recognized the sound of her husband's sharp, determined stride. Alcott. He was here. A wave of relief and anticipation rushed through her, and before she could even lift her head, the door swung open with a soft thud. Alcott stood in the doorway, his dark eyes wild with fear and desperation as he searched the room, his powerful frame tense beneath the tailored lines of his dark suit. His gaze locked on Marie, and his eyes narrowed at the tears on her face. "Marie." His deep voice was rough with concern as he crossed the room in 2 long strides, sinking to his knees before her. His strong hands framed her face as his thumb brushed over the tear tracks, staining her cheeks. "What happened?" His voice broke with quiet panic. "Are you hurt? Are you okay?" Marie's breath hitched, her lips trembling as fresh tears pooled in her eyes. Her fingers curled around the ultrasound photo as she lifted it between them, her hands shaking. "Alcott," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of emotion. I'm pregnant." Alcott's breath caught sharply, his entire body stiffening as his eyes darkened. "What?" His gaze flicked between her face and the trembling photo in her hand. Marie inhaled shakily. "We're having triplets." Silence slammed into the room like a thunderclap. Alcott's eyes widened in stunned disbelief, his mouth parting as his gaze dropped to the ultrasound photo. His chest heaved as he reached out with shaking hands, taking the delicate strip of paper from her trembling fingers. His dark eyes scanned the image, his breath hitching painfully as understanding dawned in his expression. "Triplets," he repeated in a raw whisper. Marie nodded as tears spilled over her lashes, her breath hitching on a broken sob. Alcott's hands shook as he traced his thumb over the small black and white shapes on the paper. His chest lifted with a sharp inhale as his gaze shot back to Marie's tearful face. "Oh my God!" His face crumbled with overwhelming emotion, and before Marie could react, he sank lower, his knees hitting the cold marble floor as he pressed his forehead against her abdomen. His broad shoulders trembled as a deep, broken sob escaped him. "Oh my God! Marie!" His hands slid beneath her shirt, his fingers splaying across her belly as if he could already feel their tiny heartbeats beneath her skin. His lips pressed reverently against her abdomen as his breath shuddered. 3 babies. Our babies. His voice broke on a raw whisper. Marie, you've made me the happiest man in the world. Marie's hand slid into his dark hair, her fingers threading through the soft strands as tears slipped down her cheeks. Alcott's breath shook as he lifted his head, his dark eyes gleaming with wetness as he looked up at her. His hands framed her waist, his touch tender yet trembling with emotion. You've given me the greatest gift I could ever ask for, he whispered. His chest heaved as he stood, lifting her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Marie gasped as Alcott's lips crashed against hers, desperate and unrestrained. His arms tightened around her, his kiss fierce and reverent, as though he were trying to convey the depth of his gratitude and love through the connection of their mouths. When he finally pulled away, his breath was ragged, his eyes dark with tears. He pressed his forehead against hers, his hands resting protectively over her abdomen. You are my everything, he whispered, and now you've given me everything. Marie's tears flowed freely as her hands slid up his chest, her fingers curling around the lapels of his jacket. I love you, she choked out. Alcott's jaw clenched, his eyes burning with raw intensity. I love you more than life itself. He bent his head, kissing the tears from her cheeks as his hands brushed protectively over her stomach. I swear to God, Marie, I will protect you and our babies with my life. Marie's breath hitched as Alcott lifted her in his arms, carrying her toward the hospital bed as though she were the most precious treasure in the world. He sat down, settling her in his lap as his hands traced the curve of her abdomen with quiet reverence. His gaze softened, dark lashes damp with tears. Triplets, he whispered, almost as if he were speaking to the tiny lives growing within her. We're going to have 3 babies. Marie's lips trembled as her hand joined his over her belly. Yes, she whispered. Alcott's eyes darkened with fierce determination. I will give you and our babies the most perfect life. You will never know pain again. You will never know sadness. His hand slid up to her face, cradling her cheek. I will worship you, Marie. I will make you the queen of my world, and our children will have everything they could ever need. Marie's heart swelled with overwhelming love and gratitude as Alcott leaned in, pressing his lips softly against hers. Thank you, he whispered against her mouth. Thank you for giving me this gift. Marie's arms curled around his neck as her tears mingled with his. We've been blessed, she whispered. Alcott's gaze sharpened with fierce protectiveness. Yes, he said, his voice low and raw. And I will spend the rest of my life protecting you and our babies. His hands splayed over her abdomen once more, and Marie sighed as he pressed his lips to her forehead. Triplets, Alcott whispered again, his voice soft with wonder. Our miracle. And in that quiet, sacred moment, Marie knew that their love had created more than just life. It had created a future filled with overwhelming love, hope, and the unbreakable bond of family. From the moment the doctor confirmed the miracle of triplets, Alcott's overwhelming joy transformed into a fierce, all-consuming protectiveness that bordered on obsession. He had always been devoted to Marie, treating her with a love so deep and pure that it often left her breathless. But now that she carried their 3 precious children within her, that devotion intensified into something primal and relentless. Alcott became a man possessed, determined to shield Marie and their unborn babies from even the slightest discomfort, as if the sheer force of his love could protect them from every possible danger. The very next day, Alcott assembled a team of 50 of the best and most renowned nurses and medical professionals in the country, each hand-picked through an exhaustive vetting process. These nurses were not just the best in terms of skill, they were sworn to absolute confidentiality and unwavering loyalty to the billionaire's household. Alcott ensured that a rotating team of 5 nurses would be present at all times, stationed strategically throughout the villa. Marie wasn't even allowed to lift a finger. If she so much as glanced toward the kitchen, a nurse would be by her side in an instant, ready to bring her whatever she desired. And it wasn't just the medical staff. Alcott also hired a team of nutritionists, personal chefs, and fitness experts who specialized in prenatal care. Every meal Marie consumed was carefully prepared, balanced to perfection with the right nutrients to nourish both her and the babies growing within her. If Marie even mentioned a craving in passing, whether it was fresh strawberries, handmade French pastries flown in from Paris, or something as simple as ice cream, Alcott ensured that it was delivered to her within minutes. Their villa was transformed overnight. Alcott spared no expense in ensuring Marie's comfort and safety. The master bedroom was completely redesigned with the finest materials and state-of-the-art technology. Alcott imported a custom-made bed from Italy, crafted with memory foam and temperature-regulating technology to ensure Marie's comfort during pregnancy. He had the walls soundproofed to create a serene environment, and he installed floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean so that Marie could relax while basking in the calming view of the waves. An elevator was installed to prevent Marie from having to use the stairs, and the floors were layered with plush rugs to cushion her steps. Alcott even replaced all the furniture with softer edges to eliminate any risk of Marie accidentally hurting herself. Marie joked that she felt like a queen, but Alcott would always respond with quiet intensity. "You're more than a queen. You're my whole world." And it wasn't just words. Alcott's actions spoke louder than anything. He rarely left her side, restructuring his business empire to work remotely so that he could be home with her at all times. Meetings with shareholders and business partners were held via secure video calls from a private office Alcott had constructed just off the master suite, so that he was never more than a few steps away from Marie. Even when Marie was sleeping, Alcott would sit by the bed, his hand resting protectively over her growing belly. He would whisper soft promises to the babies, his deep voice laced with reverence. "You are so loved," he would murmur. "Your mother and I have waited for you for so long. I will protect you with everything I have." Alcott's fierce protectiveness extended beyond the villa walls. He doubled the security around their estate, hiring an elite team of bodyguards, former military operatives trained in advanced defense tactics, to patrol the perimeter. State-of-the-art surveillance systems were installed, and Alcott personally oversaw every detail, ensuring that no threat, no matter how small, could breach the sanctuary he had built for Marie and their babies. Even when Marie wanted to leave the villa for simple outings, Alcott insisted on accompanying her. When Marie suggested that she could manage short walks through the estate's sprawling gardens alone, Alcott's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "No," he said firmly. "You are carrying our babies. I won't take any chances." When Marie laughed and teased him about being paranoid, Alcott's dark eyes softened, but his gaze remained fierce. "Marie," he whispered, brushing his thumb along her cheek. "You have no idea how much you mean to me. You've given me the greatest gift of my life. I won't risk losing you." And Marie knew that Alcott meant it. He adored her, worshipped her, and the idea of losing her or their babies was something Alcott could not even bring himself to contemplate. His protectiveness showed even in the smallest details. When Marie started having trouble sleeping due to the weight of the pregnancy, Alcott personally consulted with sleep specialists, eventually commissioning a custom mattress designed specifically for pregnant women. He would sit behind her at night, cradling her body against his chest, massaging her back and whispering soothing words until she drifted off to sleep. And when Marie woke up in the middle of the night, restless or uncomfortable, Alcott was always there, already awake, already anticipating her needs. His hands would stroke her hair, his voice low and comforting. "I'm here, baby. Just tell me what you need." Marie had never known a love like this, a love so deep, so absolute, that it transcended everything else. And yet, Alcott's protectiveness never felt stifling or controlling. It felt like being wrapped in the safest, warmest cocoon. She felt cherished, adored, and utterly protected. Even when Marie tried to protest, when she insisted she could take care of herself, Alcott would only smile and press a tender kiss to her forehead. "I know you can," he would say, "but you don't have to. That's my job now." When Marie's body began to change as the pregnancy progressed, when the curve of her belly became more pronounced and her movements became slower, Alcott's adoration only deepened. He would spend hours tracing his fingers over the gentle swell of her abdomen, whispering to their babies as if they could already hear him. "Daddy loves you," he would say, his deep voice soft with reverence. "You're growing so strong, just like your mother." And Marie would smile through her tears, overwhelmed by the depth of Alcott's love. He was more than just a husband. He was her rock, her protector, the man who had turned her lifelong dream into a reality. "I don't know how I got so lucky," Marie whispered one night, her voice thick with emotion as Alcott's hands slid protectively over her belly. Alcott's dark eyes softened as he bent his head, his lips brushing against hers. "No," he whispered. "I'm the lucky one. You've given me everything." His hand slid beneath her shirt, splaying over her bare skin as his mouth pressed tenderly against her forehead. "You've given me life." And in that quiet moment, Marie knew with absolute certainty that Alcott would protect her and their babies with the same fierce, undying love that had brought them to this miraculous moment. From the moment Marie found out she was pregnant with triplets, Alcott elevated his love and devotion to an entirely new level, treating her like a precious jewel, like the most delicate and treasured woman in existence. Marie had always known that Alcott adored her. He had always been a romantic husband, thoughtful and attentive in ways that left her breathless. But now, with their babies growing inside her, his affection transformed into something bordering on reverence. He treated her not just as a wife or the mother of his future children, but as royalty. No, even more than royalty. Marie was his queen, his goddess, his everything. Alcott's wealth had always been immense, his power unmatched. But now he poured every ounce of his resources and influence into creating a world where Marie felt cherished and worshipped. He hired the most renowned chefs from around the world, culinary masters whose names were whispered in elite circles, to cook her meals. It wasn't just about satisfying her cravings. It was about nourishing her body and the babies growing within her with the highest quality ingredients. When Marie casually mentioned that she was craving Italian food, Alcott flew in a Michelin-starred chef from Florence that same day, ensuring that the pasta was handmade and the sauce was simmered to perfection. When she craved sushi, Alcott had an expert flown in from Tokyo who crafted delicate pieces from the freshest ingredients, ensuring that it was safe for pregnancy. When she wanted chocolate cake, Alcott had the finest pastry chef from Paris flown in overnight, and the result was a masterpiece that melted on Marie's tongue and left her breathless. But Alcott didn't stop there. He surrounded Marie with luxury at every turn. Their bedroom became a sanctuary of indulgence. He replaced the sheets with imported silk from Italy, so soft that it felt like Marie was sleeping on clouds. He filled the room with the soft fragrance of fresh roses. Alcott made sure that the flowers were changed daily, ensuring that the room was always bathed in the delicate scent of romance. Even the lighting was adjusted, soft golden hues that bathed Marie in warmth, making her feel safe and cocooned. Every morning, Alcott would sit beside her and kiss her swollen belly, his large, strong hands resting protectively over the curve of her growing body. "Good morning, my loves," he would whisper, his deep voice vibrating against her skin as he kissed her belly reverently. "Did you sleep well for Mommy?" And Marie would laugh softly, her heart swelling with warmth as Alcott's mouth trailed over her belly, his lips pressing soft kisses as if he could already feel the connection to their children. "Daddy loves you already," he would whisper against her skin, his dark eyes soft with emotion as he stroked the swell of her abdomen. "You are so wanted, so loved. I can't wait to meet you." He would spend hours talking to the babies, telling them stories about how much he loved their mother, how he had dreamed of this moment for so long. Marie often woke up from naps to find Alcott sitting beside her, his hand resting over her belly, his gaze dark and intense with love. He would smile when he noticed her waking, leaning down to press a soft kiss to her temple. "You're so beautiful, Marie," he would say, his voice rough with emotion. "Carrying our babies. You have no idea how much you mean to me." Alcott didn't just pamper her with words, his actions spoke louder than anything. He commissioned the finest maternity wardrobe for her, ensuring that every dress, every piece of fabric that touched her body was designed with comfort and elegance in mind. Soft cashmere, delicate lace, flowing silk, Marie felt like a princess in every piece, and Alcott would often sit back and admire her with a look of utter devotion in his eyes. "You're glowing," he would say, his gaze darkening with desire as he trailed his fingers over the gentle swell of her belly. "Pregnancy looks so beautiful on you." Marie would laugh, feeling self-conscious about her changing body, but Alcott would silence her with a kiss, his hands framing her face as he whispered against her lips, "You have never been more beautiful to me." Every night, Alcott would give her a massage, his strong hands working out the tension in her back and legs with practiced skill. He would light candles scented with lavender and rose, dim the lights, and create an atmosphere so relaxing that Marie would melt beneath his touch. His hands would slide over her bare skin with reverence, and when she would sigh in relief, Alcott would smile and press a kiss to her shoulder. "Relax, baby," he would whisper. "Let me take care of you." And he meant it. Alcott took care of everything. When Marie expressed concern about the nursery, Alcott immediately called in the best designers in the country. Within a week, the nursery was transformed into a masterpiece, a soft, dreamy sanctuary filled with plush toys, handmade cribs, and the softest blankets. The walls were painted in gentle shades of cream and pale blue, with delicate stars and clouds decorating the ceiling. "Only the best for our babies," Alcott said, his arm wrapped around Marie's waist as they stood in the doorway of the nursery. Marie leaned into his side, tears stinging her eyes as she whispered, "You didn't have to do all of this." Alcott turned her toward him, his hands framing her face with gentle intensity. "Yes, I did," he said softly. "Because you deserve the best. You're giving me the greatest gift of my life. Taking care of you is the least I can do." Marie's heart swelled as Alcott leaned down and kissed her deeply, his lips molding to hers with a tenderness that made her heart race. And it wasn't just about the grand gestures. Alcott's love showed in the quiet moments too. When Marie was tired, he would carry her to bed without hesitation, holding her against his chest as if she weighed nothing. When she couldn't sleep, Alcott would stroke her hair and hum softly until her breathing evened out. When she cried from the overwhelming hormones, Alcott would hold her close and whisper, "Let it out, baby. I'm right here." And when Marie worried about the future, about being a mother to 3 babies at once, Alcott would tilt her chin up and say, "We'll figure it out together. You're not alone." Marie knew that Alcott would never let her feel alone. Not now. Not ever. He was there for every doctor's appointment, holding her hand and rubbing soothing circles into her back. He would study the ultrasound images with a fierce intensity, his eyes softening when he saw the tiny heartbeats flickering on the screen. "They're strong," Alcott would whisper, his lips brushing over Marie's temple, "just like their mother." And Marie knew that Alcott would protect them with his life. He already loved those babies more than anything. But Marie knew that Alcott's love for her was just as profound. She felt it in every touch, every word, every action. She felt it when Alcott tucked her into bed at night, when he kissed her forehead and whispered, "Sleep, my love." She felt it when he ran his hands over her growing belly, when he whispered promises to their babies. She felt it when he pressed his lips to hers and said, "You're my whole world, Marie. You and these babies. You are everything to me." And as Alcott held her close, his arms wrapped protectively around her, Marie knew that no matter what the future held, she would never feel anything less than cherished, loved, and protected. Even as Marie's belly grew rounder with the life of their triplets, Alcott's desire for her never dimmed. It only intensified, becoming a powerful force that seemed to pull them together even more strongly than before. Marie had worried in those early weeks that Alcott might start to see her differently as her body changed, her once flat stomach now swelling with the unmistakable evidence of the life they had created together. But Alcott's reaction was the opposite. If anything, he seemed even more captivated by her. His dark eyes would follow her as she moved through the villa, filled with a deep, possessive hunger that made Marie's pulse race. He would find any excuse to touch her, his hand on the small of her back as they walked, his palm resting protectively over her belly when they sat together, his lips brushing against her neck whenever she stood still, long enough for him to steal a kiss. And at night, his desire for her ignited into something deeper and more consuming. Marie would often find herself lying in their enormous bed, bathed in the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the windows, her heart racing as Alcott's strong arms pulled her against his body. "You're so beautiful," he would whisper against her skin, his lips tracing a delicate path down her shoulder. "Even more beautiful now." His hands would roam over her body with reverence, stroking over the gentle swell of her belly, his fingers splaying possessively across the curve, as if to remind her that this life growing within her was theirs, a product of their love, a miracle born from their devotion. "Do you have any idea how much I love you?" Alcott's voice would be rough with emotion as his lips pressed to the sensitive skin just beneath her ear. Marie's breath would hitch, her heart swelling with warmth as Alcott's mouth trailed down her throat, leaving soft, lingering kisses that sent a shiver down her spine. "You make me crazy, Marie," he would murmur, his hands sliding beneath the silk nightgown she wore, tracing gentle circles over her skin. "This body, it's perfect. You're perfect." Marie would gasp, her hands clutching at his strong shoulders as Alcott's mouth found hers, his lips molding to hers with a passion that left her breathless. His kiss was deep and slow, a possessive claiming that left no doubt about how deeply he needed her. Marie would moan softly against his mouth as Alcott's hands slid down her sides, his thumbs brushing tenderly over the curve of her belly before his hands found her hips and pulled her closer against him. "Alcott!" Marie would breathe his name, her fingers threading through his dark hair as he kissed her more deeply, more urgently. His tongue slipped into her mouth, teasing and stroking as his hand slid down her thigh, his touch igniting a fire in her blood. "I love you," Alcott would whisper between kisses, his voice rough and reverent. "I love you so much, it scares me sometimes." Marie's heart would clench at the vulnerability in his tone, her arms wrapping around his neck as she kissed him back with equal hunger. "I love you too," she would whisper. Alcott's hand would slide back up to her belly, his thumb stroking over the soft skin with reverence. "And I love them," he would say softly, his forehead resting against hers as his dark eyes softened with emotion. "You're giving me everything I ever wanted, Marie. A family, a future." Tears would sting Marie's eyes as Alcott's lips brushed over her temple, his mouth lingering there as if he were imprinting his love on her skin. "You don't know how much this means to me," Alcott would whisper, his hands splaying protectively over her belly. "I wake up every morning and thank God for you." Marie would smile through her tears, her hand coming to rest over his. "I feel the same way." And Alcott's mouth would find hers again, his kiss slow and sensual as his hands worshipped her body. His lips would trail down her neck, lingering over the sensitive spot at the base of her throat, and Marie's breath would catch as Alcott's mouth traveled lower, pressing kisses over her collarbone and down the swell of her breast. "Alcott." Marie's voice would tremble as his hand slid beneath the silk of her nightgown, his touch reverent and tender as his lips trailed fire over her skin. "I need you." Alcott's dark eyes would blaze with love and hunger as he lifted his gaze to meet hers. "You have me," he would murmur, his voice rough and filled with promise. "Always." His mouth would capture hers again, his kiss deep and searching as his hands slid over her body with worshipful tenderness. Marie would arch beneath his touch, her body responding to him with a fierce intensity that left her breathless. Alcott would take his time, savoring every inch of her with the kind of unhurried reverence that made Marie's heart race. His hands would stroke over her belly, his touch gentle yet possessive as he whispered against her skin. "You're carrying our future, Marie, our legacy. I've never loved anyone the way I love you." Marie would gasp as Alcott's mouth found the sensitive skin at the base of her throat, his tongue teasing over her pulse point as his hands cradled her growing belly. His touch was protective and claiming all at once, a reminder that Marie belonged to him, that the life they had created together was sacred. "You're so beautiful," Alcott would whisper, his lips trailing over her shoulder. "Every curve, every part of you, you're perfect." Marie's heart would race as Alcott's mouth claimed hers again, his kiss slow and possessive as his hands traced over her body with worshipful tenderness. His touch would ignite a fire within her, a warmth that spread through her veins and made her ache for him in the deepest, most profound way. Alcott would hold her close, his breath mingling with hers as he whispered, "I need you, Marie. I need you more than I need air." And Marie would melt beneath him, her arms tightening around his neck as she whispered, "I'm yours, Alcott. Always." Alcott would smile against her lips, his hands stroking tenderly over the swell of her belly. "And you're mine," he would whisper, "forever." Their connection was deeper than passion. It was soul deep, a bond forged through love and sacrifice, and the profound gift of life growing within Marie's body. Alcott would kiss her until she was breathless, until her body trembled beneath his touch. And when he finally pulled her into his arms, resting his hand over her belly, Marie would feel safe and cherished in a way that no words could ever capture. "Sleep, my love," Alcott would whisper against her hair, his hand splayed protectively over her belly. "I'll be right here when you wake up." And as Marie drifted off to sleep, nestled against the warmth of Alcott's body, she knew that nothing could ever break the love they shared, that this connection, this family, was the greatest gift of her life. The day Marie had been waiting for, the day Alcott had prayed for, finally arrived like a storm breaking after years of drought. It started early in the morning when Marie woke to a sharp, twisting pain low in her abdomen. At first, she thought it might just be the usual discomfort that had accompanied her pregnancy in the later months. But when the pain intensified and her water broke in a sudden, shocking rush, panic surged through her veins. "Alcott!" she screamed, clutching her belly as the first intense contraction seized her body. Within seconds, Alcott was there, his face pale with fear, but his movements steady as he swept her into his arms and carried her out of their bedroom. "It's time," Marie gasped, her nails digging into his shirt as another wave of pain rippled through her. Alcott's jaw clenched as he barked orders to the staff, and within minutes, a private ambulance arrived at their villa. Alcott refused to let go of Marie's hand as they were rushed to the hospital, his other hand constantly resting on her swollen belly, as if his touch alone could ease her pain. "Breathe, baby," Alcott whispered, his lips pressed to her temple as Marie's body trembled with the force of another contraction. "I'm here. I'm not leaving you." The ride to the hospital was a blur of pain and fear, but Alcott's steady presence grounded Marie. He wiped the sweat from her brow, kissed her trembling lips, and whispered constant reassurances. "You're strong, Marie. You've got this. I'm with you." When they arrived at the hospital, a team of doctors and nurses were already waiting, and Alcott carried Marie into the delivery room himself, ignoring the protests of the staff. "She's my wife," he growled, his fierce protectiveness making even the most seasoned doctors step back. "I'm not leaving her side." Marie's hand tightened around his as the contractions grew more intense. "Alcott, it hurts," she sobbed, her body arching off the bed as another wave of pain tore through her. Alcott's eyes shone with unshed tears as he leaned over her, brushing his lips over her forehead. "I know, baby, I know, but you can do this. You're the strongest woman I know." His voice cracked with emotion as Marie screamed through another contraction. "Just breathe, my love. I'm right here." The doctors' voices filled the room, urgent and commanding, but all Marie could focus on was Alcott's hand, his strong fingers wrapped around hers, his dark eyes filled with nothing but devotion and love. "You're almost there, Marie," the doctor said. "I can see the head. One more push." Marie sobbed, her body trembling with exhaustion, but Alcott cupped her face, his forehead pressed against hers. "Look at me," he whispered, his breath warm against her lips. "You can do this. I believe in you. Just one more, baby. For me." With a primal scream, Marie bore down, using every ounce of strength left in her body. And then, suddenly, miraculously, a thin, piercing wail filled the room. Marie gasped, her heart nearly stopping as the doctor lifted a squirming, red-faced baby into the air. "It's a boy," the doctor announced. Tears poured down Marie's face as Alcott choked on a sob, his hand tightening around hers. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice breaking as the nurse wrapped the baby in a soft blanket and placed him on Marie's chest. Marie's heart swelled as she looked down at their son, tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair just like his father's. "Alcott." Marie's voice trembled as tears streaked down her cheeks. "He's beautiful." Alcott's hand covered hers as he stared at their son with wide, reverent eyes. "You did it, baby," Alcott whispered, his lips brushing over Marie's damp forehead. "You gave me a son." But before they could fully process the miracle in their arms, the doctor's voice broke through the haze. "We're not done yet. The second baby is coming." Marie's body tensed as another contraction seized her, and Alcott's eyes widened in horror as he realized the intensity of what was still happening. "Marie, I can't," she sobbed, her body shaking with exhaustion. "Yes, you can." Alcott's voice was fierce as he gripped her hand tighter. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known. You can do this, baby. You can—" Marie screamed as another wave of pain tore through her, but Alcott's hand stayed steady around hers, his lips pressing desperate kisses to her forehead. "I'm right here," he whispered. "I'm not leaving you." And then, a second sharp cry pierced the room. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up a tiny, squirming baby with delicate features and a full head of dark hair. Marie's chest heaved as tears blurred her vision. "A girl?" Alcott's breath hitched as the nurse carefully placed the newborn girl in his arms. Alcott's hands trembled as he stared down at his daughter, his throat tightening with emotion. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice cracking as his gaze lifted to Marie's exhausted but glowing face. "You gave me a son and a daughter," Alcott choked, tears streaming down his cheeks. But then, Marie, one more push. The doctor's urgent voice broke through the moment. Alcott's head whipped around, his eyes wide. Another? Marie's eyes widened in shock, but her body was already tensing with the force of another contraction. Alcott kissed her trembling lips. One more, baby. You can do it. I know you can. Marie screamed as she pushed one final time, and then another wail filled the room. Another girl, the doctor announced, his tone filled with amazement. Marie sobbed as the third baby was placed in her arms, a tiny, perfect angel with dark curls and rosebud lips. Alcott dropped to his knees beside the bed, his face buried against Marie's arm as tears streamed down his face. 3, he whispered in disbelief. 3 perfect babies. His hands shook as he touched each tiny head, his heart so full it felt like it might shatter. You did it, Alcott choked, lifting his tear-filled eyes to Marie's face. My God, Marie, you gave me the world. His hand cupped her cheek as his lips found hers in a desperate, trembling kiss. Thank you, he whispered against her lips. Thank you for this miracle. Marie's heart swelled as Alcott's arms wrapped around her and their babies, holding them close as tears of overwhelming happiness poured down his cheeks. We're a family now, Alcott whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Forever. Alcott had always been a man of action, a man who built his empire with determination and ruthless precision. But the moment he held his newborn son and daughters in his arms, something profound shifted inside him. He sat in the quiet glow of the hospital room, his arms wrapped around Marie as their 3 perfect babies lay sleeping in the bassinets beside them. The soft rise and fall of their tiny chests, the delicate curl of their fists, the faintest hint of Marie's features mirrored in their perfect faces. It was more than he had ever dreamed of, more than he had dared to hope for after years of heartbreak and disappointment. Alcott's chest swelled with emotion, tears burning his eyes as he leaned down to kiss Marie's temple. I don't deserve this, he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his gratitude. But I swear, I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you. Of them. Marie smiled softly, her fingers brushing against the dark stubble on his jaw. You already are. But Alcott's mind was racing, not with business strategies or corporate takeovers, things that had once consumed him, but with an overwhelming need to share the miracle he had been given. His life had changed so completely in just a matter of hours, and now that he had been given the gift of fatherhood, of family, of a love so deep it made his chest ache, he couldn't stop thinking about the countless children in the world who had nothing. He thought of the orphanages he had passed in the poorer districts of the city, the homeless shelters overcrowded with desperate children clutching worn blankets and empty stomachs. He thought of the fear and loneliness etched into their small faces, faces that reminded him too much of his own childhood, of the hollow ache of growing up without a father's arms to shield him, without a mother's kiss to soothe his nightmares. Alcott's jaw tightened as his arms curled protectively around his newborn son. His heart thundered with resolve. No child should grow up without love, he said, his voice a quiet vow. The next morning, Alcott made a series of phone calls that would shake the business world to its core. He summoned his top financial advisors, his lawyers, and his philanthropic team to his private estate. Marie sat beside him, cradling their youngest daughter as Alcott stood before the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of their sunlit living room, his dark eyes blazing with purpose. I'm donating $70 million, Alcott announced, his voice sharp and commanding. Half to homeless shelters, half to orphanages. The room erupted into murmurs of disbelief, but Alcott silenced them with a single glare. No child will go hungry in this city again. No child will sleep without a roof over their head. No child will grow up without knowing what love feels like. His team scrambled to take notes, their hands shaking as they tried to keep up with the sheer magnitude of the plan Alcott was unfolding. He spared no detail, no expense. Tens of millions would go toward renovating orphanages, hiring more staff, providing new clothes, bedding, and school supplies. Children would receive medical care, therapy, and most importantly, loving, stable homes. Alcott personally ensured that each orphanage would have carefully vetted adoptive parents available, people capable of giving these children the kind of stable, nurturing environment they deserved. I want educational programs set up, sports leagues, music classes. I want these kids to dream, to have a future. His advisors stared at him in disbelief. Sir, that's going to cost more than you've projected. Alcott's gaze darkened, then increased the budget. His tone was sharp and unapologetic. Do whatever it takes. His team scattered, working tirelessly to execute Alcott's unprecedented vision. Marie watched it all unfold with quiet admiration, tears glistening in her eyes as Alcott returned to her side. He sank down onto the plush couch beside her, his hand resting on her thigh as he brushed his lips over the soft, downy hair of their son. "Why are you doing this?" Marie whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Alcott's dark eyes softened as he looked at her. "Because I know what it feels like to grow up without love." His throat tightened. "And now that I know what love feels like, I can't bear the thought of any child missing out on it." Marie's heart swelled as she touched his face, her fingertips tracing the hard lines that softened under her touch. "You have the biggest heart, Alcott." He smiled faintly, pressing a kiss to her palm. "You gave it to me." Over the next few months, Alcott's plan unfolded with staggering efficiency. New shelters sprang up across the city, staffed with top-tier medical professionals and counselors. Orphanages were renovated into bright, beautiful homes where children laughed and played. Alcott personally oversaw every detail, often arriving at the sites with Marie and the babies in tow. He held his son in one arm and his youngest daughter in the other as he spoke to the staff, ensuring that no corner was cut, no child overlooked. Marie often watched him from a distance, her heart swelling with pride as Alcott crouched down to speak to the children face to face. He listened to their stories, his large hands tender as he ruffled their hair or wiped away a stray tear. "You're not alone anymore," he told them softly. "You're safe now." One evening, after a long day of overseeing construction at a new shelter, Alcott stood with Marie and their babies on a balcony overlooking the city skyline. The setting sun bathed them in golden light, and Alcott's arms tightened around Marie's waist as their 3 babies slept soundly in a nearby bassinet. "You changed me," Alcott whispered against her hair. Marie leaned back against his chest, her hand resting over his heart. "You changed me first." Alcott smiled, his dark eyes shining with quiet contentment. "I used to think power and money were everything," he murmured. "But now I know. This is everything." He kissed the side of her neck, his lips brushing her skin as his arms cradled her against him. "Family, love, that's everything." Marie turned in his arms, her eyes glowing with tenderness as her fingers curled around the nape of his neck. "You gave that to me, Alcott." He shook his head, his expression raw with emotion. "You gave me everything." His lips claimed hers in a slow, reverent kiss as the city lights blinked to life beneath them. Behind them, the sound of their baby's soft breathing filled the air, a quiet, perfect reminder of the miracle they had been given. Alcott broke the kiss, his forehead resting against Marie's as his hand drifted down to cradle her belly protectively. "I love you," he whispered. Marie's eyes filled with tears as she smiled. "Forever." Alcott's gaze darkened with fierce devotion. "Forever." And as the city below pulsed with life, Alcott knew that this love, this family, was the legacy he would leave behind. Alcott had always been a man in control, a man who commanded boardrooms, sealed billion-dollar deals with a single phone call, and built an empire with his bare hands. But nothing in his life had ever prepared him for the overwhelming joy and chaotic beauty of fatherhood. From the moment their triplets were born, Alcott's world shifted on its axis. His priorities rearranged themselves overnight, business meetings and financial reports fading into the background as the cries and coos of his newborn son and daughters took center stage in his heart. He had expected to love them, of course. How could he not when they were a perfect blend of him and Marie? But nothing could have prepared him for the sheer, visceral intensity of it. It was in the way his chest tightened painfully when he saw their tiny hands curl around his finger, the way his throat burned with emotion when he heard their soft breathing as they slept, the way his heart ached with fierce protectiveness when one of them whimpered in their sleep. And Alcott, who had once commanded entire corporate armies without blinking, found himself wrapped around his baby's tiny fingers with an effortless grace that left Marie breathless. Their first night home from the hospital had been overwhelming. Marie had been exhausted, her body still healing from the birth, and the triplets had been fussy, their cries filling the nursery as the overwhelming reality of parenthood crashed down on them. Marie had been on the verge of tears, her body aching, her heart pounding with exhaustion and fear. But then Alcott had stepped in. Without hesitation, he had scooped up their son in one arm and their daughters in the other, his massive frame moving with practiced ease as he settled them gently against his chest. He had kissed Marie's forehead, his dark eyes tender with reassurance. "Sleep, my love," he had murmured. "I've got them." Marie had watched through heavy-lidded eyes as Alcott paced the nursery with their babies cradled against him. He had begun to hum softly, a deep, soothing sound that seemed to calm the babies instantly. Their son had let out a soft sigh, curling into Alcott's chest, while the girls settled against his broad shoulders, their tiny fists clutching at his shirt. Marie had fallen asleep to the sound of Alcott's low voice, a lullaby of comfort and love. From that night on, Alcott had taken to fatherhood with the same obsessive devotion he had once reserved for his business empire. He was the first to wake when the babies stirred, moving with the stealth and precision of a man who had spent his life making quick, strategic decisions. He would slip out of bed before Marie could even lift her head, gathering the babies in his strong arms as he rocked them back to sleep. He learned how to prepare bottles with mechanical efficiency, standing barefoot in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, his eyes dark with sleep but his expression unwavering as he fed his children one by one. He had memorized which cry belonged to which baby, knowing instinctively when his son needed comfort or when his daughters were simply trying to outdo each other in noise. Marie often woke to find Alcott sprawled on the nursery floor, one baby asleep on his chest and the other two tucked against his sides. His arms would be wrapped protectively around them, his breathing deep, and even as the soft rise and fall of his chest lulled the babies into perfect peace. And when they woke in the middle of the night, screaming and restless, Alcott was always the one to calm them. He would scoop them up in his large hands, whispering soft reassurances as he walked them through the dimly lit hallways of their villa. "Daddy's here," he would murmur. "Daddy's got you." His voice was like a balm, low and soothing, and the babies would melt into his arms, their cries fading into content sighs. Marie would watch from the doorway, tears shining in her eyes as Alcott moved with effortless grace, his strong hands so gentle as he cared for their children. And when the babies finally fell asleep, Alcott would return to bed, curling his body around Marie's as he pressed soft kisses to her temple. "Rest, my love," he would whisper. "I've got them." During the day, Alcott's devotion was no less intense. His business empire, once the center of his universe, had become secondary to the life he had built with Marie and their babies. He had cut his work hours down to half, delegating responsibilities to his most trusted advisors as he focused on raising his children. He had turned the east wing of their mansion into a playroom, an elaborate sanctuary filled with soft carpets, plush toys, and handcrafted wooden furniture. Alcott would sit on the floor for hours, cradling one of the babies in his lap as he read to them from leather-bound storybooks. Their son would tug on Alcott's shirt with tiny fists, babbling happily as Alcott smiled down at him, his dark eyes warm with unconditional love. Their daughters would curl into his side, their bright eyes fixed on his face as he spun stories of love and adventure. Marie often stood in the doorway, her heart swelling with love as Alcott's deep voice filled the room. He would look up and smile at her, his dark gaze softening as their eyes met. "Come here," he would say, holding out his hand. Marie would join them, settling against Alcott's side as he wrapped an arm around her and the babies. It was the happiest Marie had ever been. Their home was no longer just a house. It was a sanctuary, a place filled with warmth and laughter and the soft echo of baby giggles. Alcott's devotion to his children knew no limits. When the babies began teething, Alcott was the one who stayed up with them, his large hands rubbing gentle circles over their backs as he paced the nursery for hours. When their daughters took their first steps, Alcott had been there, his strong hands ready to catch them as they stumbled toward him. And when their son spoke his first word, "Dada," Alcott had dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face as he gathered his son into his arms. Marie had laughed, her heart bursting with love, as Alcott pressed kisses to their son's chubby cheeks. "Say it again," Alcott had begged, his voice breaking with emotion. "Dada," their son had babbled, and Alcott had laughed through his tears. "That's right," he had whispered. "Daddy's always here." Marie often teased Alcott about how fiercely protective he was. "You're going to scare off their future dates," she would joke, but Alcott's gaze would darken with quiet resolve. "Good," he would say. "No one will ever be good enough for them." But beneath Alcott's fierce protectiveness was a man whose heart had been cracked wide open by the love of his wife and his children. He was softer now, more patient, more tender. His eyes, once dark with ruthless ambition, now glowed with quiet contentment as he held his children close. And when Marie curled against his chest at night, Alcott would wrap his arms around her, his hand resting protectively on her hip as their babies slept peacefully nearby. "We did it," Alcott would whisper against her hair. Marie would smile, her hand curling over his chest as his heartbeat pulsed beneath her palm. "We built a family." Alcott's lips curved into a soft smile as he kissed her forehead. "You gave me a family," he whispered. "You gave me everything." And as Marie drifted to sleep in the safety of his arms, Alcott knew that nothing, not wealth, not power, not success, could ever compare to the quiet, perfect joy of holding his family close. Time passed in the blink of an eye, and before Alcott and Marie could fully grasp the reality of it, their triplets were growing at a pace that felt both magical and heartbreaking. The newborn cries that once filled their nights were soon replaced by soft babbling and curious coos. And then, before they knew it, those sweet sounds turned into words. First, it was simple words like "mama" and "dada" that made Alcott and Marie's hearts swell with pride, and tears filled their eyes. But soon, those small words blossomed into full sentences, accompanied by wide, sparkling eyes and tiny, outstretched arms as their babies reached for them with pure trust and unconditional love. Alcott marveled at how fast time was moving, how one moment he was cradling his newborn son against his chest, marveling at how tiny his fingers were, and the next moment that same son was toddling toward him with unsteady steps, his chubby arms stretched wide as he called out, "Dada!" Alcott had been seated in his office when it happened for the first time. He had been reviewing an important business contract, his brows furrowed as he scanned the fine print. But the sound of his son's wobbly footsteps on the marble floor had made him look up. When his son's arms lifted toward him, his heart had clenched so hard it hurt. He had dropped the papers without hesitation, rising to his feet and sweeping his son into his arms. "Dada," the little boy had repeated, his dark eyes, so much like Alcott's, shining with excitement and love. Alcott had held him close, his throat tightening painfully as he pressed a kiss to the soft crown of his son's head. "You walked to me," Alcott had whispered in awe. "You walked, my boy." That night, Alcott had cradled his son in bed, his strong arms wrapped protectively around him as Marie lay beside them, smiling softly at the sight of her husband's tenderness. Their daughters soon followed, their wobbly steps filling the mansion with the soft sound of pattering feet and delighted squeals as they chased each other through the grand halls of their villa. Alcott and Marie had converted the east wing of their home into a massive playroom, filling it with plush carpets, colorful toys, and an indoor climbing wall that Alcott had personally commissioned from the best craftsmen in the country. Every evening, Alcott would sit on the floor with their children, helping them build towers with blocks and laughing when their son knocked them over with a delighted giggle. Their daughters loved to climb onto Alcott's lap, their tiny hands tugging at his shirt as they demanded stories. And Alcott, who had once been a ruthless businessman feared by his competitors, now sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by stuffed animals and plastic dinosaurs as he spun elaborate tales of brave princesses and fearless knights. His daughters would squeal with delight, clutching at his arms and burying their faces against his chest as he whispered, "And the prince saved the princess." But it was the princess who saved the day. Marie would sit nearby, her heart swelling with love as she watched Alcott transform into the most doting, patient father. He spoiled them, of course, there was no denying that. Alcott's love knew no bounds, and he made sure his children had the best of everything. He bought them handcrafted wooden toys from Europe, imported cashmere blankets, and even had a miniature indoor amusement park built in the west wing of their home. But Marie, with her gentle heart and steady wisdom, ensured that their children remained grounded. She would sit with them beneath the cherry blossom trees in the garden, teaching them how to care for the earth and how to share with those who had less. "Kindness matters," she would tell them softly as she helped them pick ripe strawberries from the garden. "No matter how much you have, always remember to give." Alcott would stand nearby, his arms crossed over his chest as he watched Marie with quiet admiration. Their children adored their mother, running to her when they scraped their knees or had nightmares. Marie would hold them close, her voice soft and soothing as she kissed away their tears. Alcott was fierce and protective, but Marie was their anchor, a soft, constant presence of warmth and reassurance. When their son fell and scraped his knee one summer afternoon, Alcott had nearly lost his mind with worry. He had scooped the little boy into his arms, his jaw tense and his heart racing. But Marie had simply knelt beside them, taking their son's hand in hers as she kissed his bruised knee. "You're brave," she had whispered, smiling softly as their son sniffled. "It's okay to fall sometimes." Their daughters had crowded around, their small hands clutching at Alcott's shirt as they offered their brother stuffed animals and whispered, "It's okay." Alcott had watched in awe as Marie calmed them all with nothing more than her voice and the warmth of her presence. She was their calm, their strength, and Alcott's heart swelled with fierce gratitude that she was his. Their family grew stronger with each passing day. Alcott and Marie were the perfect team, balancing each other in ways that felt effortless and right. Alcott had always been protective, his love for Marie and their children bordering on obsession. But Marie balanced that intensity with her quiet grace. When Alcott worried too much, Marie would kiss his hand and whisper, "They're strong, just like you." And when Marie fretted over their children's futures, Alcott would take her hand and say, "We'll face it together." Their nights were filled with laughter and quiet intimacy, with Alcott holding Marie close as their children slept nearby. Their days were busy, with Alcott attending board meetings and negotiating multi-billion-dollar deals. But no matter how demanding his schedule was, Alcott always made time for his family. He would return home every evening by 6 o'clock sharp, sweeping his children into his arms as they ran to greet him. "Daddy!" They would cry, and Alcott would kneel down, gathering them close as he pressed kisses to their foreheads. "Did you miss me?" he would ask, and their son would say, "We counted the minutes." Alcott's heart would swell with pride and fierce devotion. He would sit with them in the garden, watching the sun set as Marie settled against his side. Their daughters would sit in his lap, their son curled against Marie's chest, and Alcott would think, "This is happiness. This is everything." Marie would look up at him, her dark eyes soft with love. "We built a beautiful life," she would say softly. Alcott would kiss her temple, his hand resting over hers as he replied, "You gave me a beautiful life." Their children were their legacy, bright, loving souls raised with kindness, compassion, and strength. And Alcott and Marie knew that no matter what challenges the future held, they would face it together as a family. Because their love, the fierce, consuming love that had brought them together, was now etched into the hearts of the next generation. And as their children drifted to sleep beneath the soft glow of starlight, Alcott would hold Marie close, whispering, "Thank you for giving me this life." And Marie would smile, her heart beating in time with his, "Thank you for loving me." And together, beneath the vast sky, they would drift into sleep, surrounded by the quiet peace of a love that had created a family, perfect, whole, and everlasting. Even with the chaos of raising triplets, three lively, energetic, and incredibly curious little souls, Alcott and Marie's love only grew stronger, deepening in ways that neither of them had anticipated. Their days were a whirlwind of laughter and tears, of tiny footsteps padding through the halls and high-pitched giggles echoing through the grand villa. Yet, even amidst the beautiful chaos of parenthood, Alcott never once allowed his love for Marie to dim. In fact, it only seemed to grow more intense with each passing day. Alcott never missed a single opportunity to shower Marie with affection, as if he were still the man who had just discovered the miracle of her pregnancy. He would find her in the mornings, standing at the kitchen counter with tousled hair, cradling a cup of coffee as their daughters clung to her legs and their son sat on the floor playing with his toys. Alcott's eyes would soften at the sight, his heart squeezing with overwhelming adoration as he approached her from behind, wrapping his strong arms around her waist and pressing his lips to her neck. "Good morning, my love," he would murmur against her skin, his hands sliding protectively over her stomach even though it had been months since she had given birth. Marie would smile, leaning back into his embrace as her eyes fluttered shut. "Good morning," she would whisper back, and Alcott would turn her in his arms, his dark eyes drinking her in as if she were the most beautiful woman in the world, which, to him, she was. He would kiss her, deep and lingering, his hand tangling in her hair as their children giggled from beneath the kitchen table. "Daddy's kissing Mommy again." Their son would laugh, and Alcott would smirk against Marie's lips. "Of course I am," he would say, resting his forehead against hers. "How could I not?" And then he would kneel down, drawing his children close as he kissed their foreheads one by one. "Daddy loves you," he would say, his voice low and full of quiet devotion. "Daddy loves you so much." The chaos of raising triplets never dulled his passion for Marie. If anything, it made him love her even more. Alcott often watched in awe as Marie effortlessly balanced the needs of three small children without losing her calm or her patience. He would walk into the nursery late at night to find Marie sitting in the rocking chair, one daughter cradled in her arms and the other curled against her chest, while their son slept peacefully in his crib. Alcott's heart would swell painfully at the sight of her, his beautiful wife bathed in soft moonlight, her eyes heavy with sleep, yet filled with so much unconditional love. He would cross the room silently, kneeling beside her as he brushed his fingers over her cheek. "You're incredible," he would whisper, his voice thick with emotion. Marie would smile sleepily, her head resting against his shoulder as Alcott reached out to take one of their daughters into his arms. He would cradle her tiny form close to his chest, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead as his other hand slid protectively over Marie's knee. "Let me help," he would say, and Marie would sigh in relief as Alcott took over, rocking their daughter in his strong arms until she drifted back to sleep. Afterward, Alcott would carry Marie to bed, pulling her against him beneath the soft silk sheets. His hand would slide protectively over her waist as he whispered, "I don't know how you do it." Marie would smile against his chest, her hand resting over his heart. "Because I have you," she would whisper, and Alcott's heart would squeeze painfully with love. Their nights were still filled with passion, despite the exhaustion of parenthood. Alcott would wake in the middle of the night to find Marie curled against him, her breathing soft and even. He would slide his hand down her side, his lips brushing over her shoulder as he whispered her name. Marie would stir, her dark eyes fluttering open to find Alcott looking down at her with a gaze so full of love and desire that it made her breath hitch. "Alcott," she would whisper, and he would smile, brushing his lips over hers as his hand slid down her side. "You're beautiful," he would murmur against her mouth. "You've given me the greatest gift in the world, and you're still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Marie would blush, her heart pounding as Alcott kissed her with gentle reverence. Their kisses would grow deeper, more intense, and soon they would lose themselves in each other beneath the soft glow of the moonlight. Alcott worshipped her body the same way he had on their wedding night. If anything, his passion for her had only grown stronger. He would whisper sweet nothings into her ear as his hands caressed her, telling her how much he adored her, how grateful he was for everything she had given him. "I love you," he would breathe into her skin, "more than life itself." And Marie would hold him close, her heart aching with the depth of her love for him. Even with the demands of raising 3 children, Alcott never missed a single opportunity to tell Marie how beautiful she was. He would walk into the room while she was nursing one of their daughters and press a kiss to her forehead, whispering, "You're breathtaking." He would leave love notes on her nightstand, tucked between the pages of her favorite book. "Thank you for giving me this life," he would write. "Thank you for being mine." He would surprise her with candlelit dinners on the terrace after the babies had gone to sleep, leading her outside beneath the stars with his hand at the small of her back. Marie would sit across from him, her eyes sparkling in the candlelight as Alcott reached across the table to take her hand. "You're everything to me," he would say, his voice low and filled with quiet devotion. "Everything." Alcott would take her dancing in the moonlight, twirling her in his arms as Marie laughed breathlessly. "You're crazy," she would tease, and Alcott would smile down at her, his eyes dark with affection. "Crazy for you," he would say, brushing his lips over hers. Their connection was unbreakable, even through sleepless nights and chaotic mornings, even through the tantrums and the constant messes. Alcott and Marie's love remained strong and unwavering. They were a team, partners in every sense of the word. When their children fell ill, Alcott would stay awake all night, pacing the floor as he held their feverish bodies against his chest. "Daddy's here," he would whisper over and over. "Daddy's not going anywhere." When Marie had moments of doubt, when the exhaustion and the stress of motherhood weighed too heavily on her, Alcott would gather her into his arms and hold her close. "You're doing perfectly," he would whisper. "You're the best mother in the world, and I'm so damn lucky that you're mine." And Marie would breathe against his chest, her heart calming beneath the steady beat of his. Even as their children grew older and more independent, even as life shifted and evolved, Alcott's love for Marie never dimmed. He would still reach for her hand beneath the dinner table, still pull her into his arms after a long day. He would still kiss her beneath the stars, still tell her every night before they fell asleep, "I love you." And Marie would smile, her heart full and overflowing as she whispered back, "I love you too." Their love was stronger than ever, rooted in years of devotion, passion, and shared dreams. And Alcott knew with absolute certainty that their love would last a lifetime. Years later, Marie and Alcott sat on the terrace of their villa, the golden hues of the setting sun casting a soft glow over the sprawling gardens that surrounded their home. The villa had become more than just a house. It was a sanctuary, a place where their love had flourished, where their dreams had blossomed into a life more beautiful than they had ever imagined. Their 3 children, now growing into lively and charming young souls, were running barefoot across the perfectly manicured lawn, their laughter echoing through the air like music. The twin girls, now 8 years old, had inherited Marie's soft brown curls and Alcott's piercing blue eyes, while their son, only a year older, had his father's strong jawline and his mother's gentle smile. They chased each other around the garden, the girls squealing as their brother tackled them onto the grass before collapsing in a pile of breathless giggles. Alcott's arm was wrapped protectively around Marie's waist as they watched their children play, his thumb lazily stroking circles against her side as his dark eyes softened with warmth. "Look at them," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "They're perfect." Marie smiled, leaning her head against Alcott's broad shoulder as her hand slid over his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath her palm. "We did well," she murmured, her eyes soft with quiet pride. "They're growing up so fast." Alcott's gaze darkened with quiet reverence as he pressed a soft kiss to Marie's hair. "That's because they have you," he said, "the most incredible mother in the world." Marie's heart swelled with warmth as Alcott tightened his grip around her waist, effortlessly pulling her into his lap. She gasped softly, but Alcott's strong hands steadied her as he settled her against his chest, his lips brushing against the curve of her neck. "Alcott," she murmured, her cheeks flushing faintly, but Alcott only smiled, his blue eyes glinting mischievously. "Let me hold you," he whispered, his voice low and full of quiet affection. Marie relaxed against him, her arms looping around his neck as Alcott buried his face in the curve of her shoulder, inhaling the soft floral scent of her hair. "I love you," he murmured, his voice raw with sincerity. Marie's eyes fluttered closed as her heart swelled with love. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice trembling beneath the weight of her devotion. Alcott tilted her chin upward with his thumb, his gaze locking with hers before he brushed his lips softly over hers. The kiss was slow and lingering, a gentle melding of mouths that spoke of years of passion and unwavering devotion. Even after all this time, Alcott still kissed her as if he were discovering her for the first time, slow and deliberate, with a quiet reverence that made Marie's heart race. When they finally broke apart, Alcott's hand remained on the side of her face, his thumb stroking over her cheek as his eyes softened with quiet awe. "We have everything we ever dreamed of," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Marie smiled, her eyes glinting with quiet happiness as she rested her head against his shoulder. "We were blessed," she whispered, her heart swelling with quiet gratitude. Alcott's lips brushed over her temple as his hand slid protectively over her waist. "Blessed," he repeated softly, "and I'll keep loving you forever." His words were a promise, one that he had already kept 1,000 times over. Marie sighed softly, curling her fingers into the fabric of his shirt as Alcott's lips trailed down the side of her neck. His hand slid over her knee, drawing her closer as his mouth found the curve of her jaw. Even after years of marriage and raising 3 children together, Alcott's touch still made Marie's pulse flutter. "Alcott," she breathed, her voice catching on a soft sigh as Alcott's lips brushed over her ear. "Not here," she murmured, her eyes flicking toward their children still playing on the lawn. Alcott's deep chuckle vibrated against her skin as his hand slid over her waist. "Then maybe we need to put them to bed early tonight," he whispered, his voice laced with quiet mischief. Marie laughed, her cheeks warming as Alcott's lips found hers again in a soft, teasing kiss. "You're impossible," she whispered, but Alcott only smiled as his hand slid into her hair, holding her steady as his mouth moved over hers. "Only with you," he murmured. "Always with you." Their children's laughter pulled them from their kiss, and Marie turned her head in time to see their son scooping up one of the girls and spinning her in circles, while the other twin chased after them. Marie's heart swelled painfully with love as she watched them, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "They're growing up so fast," she whispered. Alcott's hand slid over hers, twining their fingers together as he followed her gaze. "They are," he said, his voice thick with quiet awe. "But we've built a beautiful life together, and we'll always have this." Marie's eyes softened as she leaned her head against Alcott's chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath her ear. "Thank you," she whispered. Alcott's brow furrowed as he tilted her chin upward with his thumb. "For what?" he asked. Marie's eyes glinted with quiet affection. "For choosing me," she whispered. "For loving me." Alcott's gaze softened as he brushed his lips over her forehead. "I didn't choose you," he whispered. "You were always mine. From the moment I saw you, my heart belonged to you long before I even realized it." Marie smiled, her heart swelling beneath the weight of his words. "And now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Alcott's hand slid over her cheek as his mouth hovered over hers. "Now," he whispered, "now I'm yours forever." Their lips met in a soft, lingering kiss beneath the glow of the setting sun, the quiet hum of their children's laughter echoing in the background. Marie's heart swelled with quiet happiness as Alcott's arms tightened around her, holding her close as if he would never let her go. And Marie knew with absolute certainty that their love story, the life they had built together, was the greatest gift of all